Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome to a very special stream and a very special discussion. I am joined by none other than the infamous Dave Martel of the Biz Archives. Dave, how are you doing? You still there, Dave?
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. I started getting hit with like 10 different voices at once. I had a bunch of browsers open and they all had the thing. So, my bad. So, I was like, what is going on? Yeah. So, thank you, Mr. Matt, for having me on. I'm Big Dave Martel. I'm the editor in chief of the Bizarchives, Weird Tales of Monsters, Magic, and Machines, which is a modern pulp publishing company that specializes in the fiction traditions of fantasy, sword and sorcery, cosmic horror, science fiction, cyberpunk, all of the above, all of the really great pulp genres and subgenres that we all love. That's what we specialize in. We also publish novellas from up and coming rising authors that are in the pulp scene. I'm also one half of the Culture Dads podcast, which is available over on the imperiumpress.org/podcast, where me and Mike from the Imperium Press do deep dives into retro pop culture for dissident minds. I'm also one half of the Bizarcast podcast, which is the official podcast of the Bizarchives, where we talk about movie reviews. We do author highlights. We dunk on the garbage that's in the mainstream out there, all kind of stuff like that. So I've been around for a while. Some folks might know me from the Bog. I hosted the Bog for quite a few years. So that's who I am. That's what I'm about. If you want to check out the Bizarchives, you can go over to thebizarchives.com, or you can follow us on Twitter and Telegram at the Bizarchives. We also have a Substack that's loaded with stuff called theobelisk.substack.com.
Yeah, and all those links are down in the description, so in case you guys are interested, by all means, click down below after the show. But I know that gives us a really good jumping off point. Is that how did the Biz Archives get started, and what has it turned into today?
So the Bizarchive started out. Okay, about a year and a half ago, it was kind of towards the end of lockdowns. I had a really rough go with the lockdowns. I lost my job. We had a baby during that time. Me and my wife. I got 3 kids. We had our third baby. It was just like it was a tough time. We were on the up and up as a family, about to buy a new house, et cetera, et cetera. Everything went to hell. And I was feeling some kind of way, I was feeling pretty depressed and everything like that. So I took the leftover $200 that I had from the stimulus check, and I was like, I want to create something cool, right? I want to create culture. I have to create something because at the end of the day, I'm a creative guy. I'm a writer. I'm a poet. I'm a musician. All of the above. That's what I like to do. So I was like, I got to create something. I want to create something that I love, something that hasn't been seen for a long time. So I went all the way back to the beginning, and I was like, what gets me excited? What do I love? I love old school weird fiction. I love Robert E. Howard. I love H.P. Lovecraft. I love the Weird Tales magazine stuff. I love Dune. I love all of this stuff. When I was a kid, I was a huge fan of Tales from the Crypt and Creepy and Eerie magazine, Heavy Metal magazine, all of the old school Western animation like Fire and Ice and Gandahar and all these the Heavy Metal cartoon movie, animated movie. I just love all of the above. I'm a big fan of old school heavy metal. I love the vibe that is part of this kind of imaginative fantasy science fiction culture and all of the above into it. So I was like, I want to go back to the beginning, back to like the kind of primordial beginning of these kind of modern pop culture art forms, and that is Pulp Fiction. And Pulp Fiction was kind of the big bang of pop culture, and everything that we have today that's at least good. Everything good that we have today has some sort of Pulp Fiction DNA into it. And for folks out there that might not be familiar with Pulp Fiction, and they think it's that movie with Travolta and the black guy that everybody likes, that's not what it is. That movie's just called that, right? Pulp Fiction was a Western, more specifically American, but it branched out elsewhere later on. It was an American literary movement that happened. It started in the late 1800s and the early 1900s with there's some early titles like Argosy magazine. This is before magazines, though. They were called dime novels back then, or pulp magazines or pulp novels. So you had Argosy, you had Amazing Stories, there's like just so many of them back then, right? Whatever Wonder Tales, there's just a million of these back then, and this was a huge cultural phenomenon that kind of just like got forgotten, right? It was when you say pulp is like back then. And also you got to keep in mind, pulp was the medium that it was printed on. Pulp refers to the paper that these magazines were printed on, and it was kind of the modern version would be something like what's called groundwood paper. They took all of the leftover bits and bobs of wood pulp and they pressed it into this really cheap, thick paper that was kind of hard, and it was really light, and it was really bad quality, but it was really, really cheap. And this got really, really popular because they printed really sensational, imaginative stuff on into these magazines. Started out with detective noir and gangster stuff, and there was like romance and action heroes and all of the above, right? And this was, you think of pulp as what we would like for like today, everything we listen to is on MP3, right? That's just the format that everything it comes on, right? It could be a podcast, it could be music, it could be XYZ, it could be anything, right? It comes on the MP3. That's kind of what pulp was. Everything, all of the above was on pulp. This was the main format, the main medium that culture was distributed, and it was super popular. And they were called dime novels because they costed between a nickel and a quarter. Well, this is where like pretty much the big bang of it. You can't look at anything from the Godfather movies to the spaghetti westerns to superheroes to horror movies to like you name it. It has its DNA in pulp. This was literally the big bang of pop culture, and it was really, not all of it was great, but as a whole, it was very interesting to me. I was very fascinated by this point in time, which is the late 1800s, we'll say like 1900, and then it kind of got phased out in the 1950s because number one, a lot of that wood pulp, they needed it for war efforts. They used this for, I can't remember exactly what they used it for, but they needed it, right? During World War II. And then also it got phased out because it got replaced by what's now called mass production paperbacks. Comic books kind of replaced it in some ways. And, it was just kind of an older format. So that's what pulp was back then. And I really loved, more specifically, the weird stuff. Weird Tales magazine is my favorite. It's going to be the favorite of a lot of people because this is where you get so many just greats. Like when you think of pulp now, you think of Robert E. Howard, you think of H.P. Lovecraft, you think of Clark Ashton Smith, you think of Donald Wandre, you think of there's just so many that you can just name. Robert Bloch. It's just like tons of them came out of Weird Tales magazine. Weird Tales magazine was the creme de la creme of weird, right? So that was my favorite one, and I have a bunch of reprints from that, and I'm just fascinated by this. So I wanted to fast forward now today. I wanted to recreate this, not necessarily as specifically a pastiche or something like that, but what would pulp look like today, right? So we took I took my $200. I paid paid some money to some artists, more specifically the mighty and wildly talented Mr. Donald Kent, to do some cover art for me. I raised the banner. I was like, hey guys, this is what I'm doing. Send me some submissions, and I got some. I was like, if this doesn't work, then oh well. If it doesn't work, then it doesn't work. But at least I tried. Well, I got some submissions in that were just awesome. And most of those guys are still with the Bizarchives today. Over this last year, they're still working with us and still writing for us. Guys like A. Cuthbertson, Robert C. Booth, M. Rattan. Who else we got in there? M.S. Jones. Like we got a lot of great writers that kind of got on board with us. And not just like great writers, but guys that are like, in a fairer world, in a fairer time, in a more just time, would be stars, right? These guys are really, really talented writers. So I got like these really great writers wanting to contribute to the Bizarchives, and I put it together and I put it out there, and I was like, hey, if we sell X amount of copies, and I took the standard of what a debut book makes or sells, and I was like, hey, if we make like 2/3 of this, I'll consider it somewhat of a success. Well, instead of reaching kind of that goal, that milestone, we blew it out by like 4 times in the first month. I was like, if we sell X amount of copies in the first year, I'll be happy. We did 4 times that in the first month. And we got like just this rush of positive feedback, and people just really, really liked it. And I was like, we got to keep going. So I kept going, and things keep falling into my lap, and we just keep growing and working harder and putting out more books and just learning and growing. And it's just been so fun. And what's been really special about this is it's kind of bringing this old school art form that wasn't that long ago, because there's kind of a problem in our sphere of things, guys that are traditionally minded or dissident minded or nationalist minded, whatever conservative minded, whatever you want to call, all of the above. We have this problem where we kind of mournfully look back at like what was, and we have this kind of self-hatred about ourselves today, like nothing we do in modernity is any good, everything that we do sucks. We could never paint the Sistine Chapel, we could never write another Beowulf, we could never do these Michelangelo statues again, there are no more symphonies, XYZ. We don't have that anymore. We suck, and anything that we create is lousy. And I'm here to say that, it might not, the stuff that we create now might not be as grandiose as the magnificent works of antiquity of our ancestors. But what we're creating today is part of that lineage. At least it can be, when it comes to especially Pulp Fiction and fiction writing in general. And although it might not be as grandiose as Michelangelo and Wagner, like whoever, Mozart, but it's meaningful to us, and it's fun to us, and it's relatable to us. And just not that long ago, we were creating meaningful, original, imaginative, innovative art forms that we still have the capacity to create, which is Pulp Fiction, which is fantasy art, which is all of the above, right? And I wanted to bring that back. I wanted to make reading cool again. I wanted to kind of dispel this idea that fiction is for a bunch of like smarmy nerds and weirdos and furries and all kinds of other bizarre creatures. And I bring back this idea that fiction was written by Chads. Fiction was written by the bros, because it was. You go back, you look at guys like Robert E. Howard. Robert E. Howard was a fencer and a horse rider and a marksman and a boxer. He was a boss, right? Now you can't say that about necessarily some of the other guys. Some of the other guys weren't as physical, but it was not uncommon for writers back then to be like adventurers and badass dudes themselves. And that's why they wrote such incredible action stuff, because they lived it. They weren't these like, fat nerds that lived, like we see now. It was a completely different breed of guys that were writing. And since that has changed, since the nerds have taken over fiction writing, and they have broken it from the vine, from the ancestry that goes back to Beowulf, that goes back to King Arthur, that goes back to Odysseus, right? When you read Conan, for example, Conan is a son of Odysseus, right? He has that the Nietzschean Ubermensch kind of vibe. He is muscular and powerful, and et cetera, et cetera. He's motivated by similar. He's an archetype that could sit in a room with Odysseus and Beowulf and King Arthur, right? He's like, although he is modern, it is written in a very romantic way. A lot of these pulp writers were romantics, or I just call them pulp romantics, which is why they got kind of like looked down at from the institutions. Because at that time you had a lot of, this was when modernist literature started to come into play, right? You had guys like Ezra Pound and Robert Frost and Hemingway and et cetera, et cetera. And fantasy and weird and this kind of stuff was kind of like, that's old. We're gonna leave that behind. We don't want the mythopoetic anymore because it's too ornate, it's too decorative, it's too old or whatever. And they wanted to go in a different direction and write of mice and men and like all of this kind of stuff. But the people, the working class people, still loved it. So it was like this undercurrent of art that existed throughout that time, and then it still is still alive today. So I wanted to, long story short, I've been yammering, but long story short, I just wanted to create something based that was in that lineage, that was like different than what you get out there today. Because what you get out there today, number one, it's paused and gross and weird and subversive, and number two, it's just not good. It's not good. It's boring. It's mundane. It's vanilla. It's not entertaining. It's corporate. It's garbage. So I wanted to create something that was a little bit lumpy and a little bit rough, but also imaginative and weird and offbeat and heroic and spooky and terrible and terrifying and like inspiring and beautiful and just like everything, all of the above, whatever the boys, whatever the guys have in their minds, in their imaginations, that they turn into a cool, entertaining story that really embodies what fantasy is. All art is fantasy, and what makes something fantasy is that it's immersive. Right? We're not here to sell a political agenda. We're not here to sell we're not here to force our worldviews on anybody. We're not here to rewrite history or do anything. We just want to tell cool freaking stories for the sake of cool stories and entertain the reader, thrills and chills and fun. That's what we're about, but we want to do it in an artful, cool way. So that's why we started Bizarchives, and that's kind of our goal.
Well, I'm glad that there's more pulp out there because the only ones I had known prior to you guys was the Cervosa group. They've been doing a lot of like Julian Hawthorne, Nathaniel Hawthorne's son stuff. He wrote a lot of Pulp Fiction at the time as well. He was around the time when dime novels were popular. I mean, it's really right with American history. Like, if you really want to get into pulp, the stuff that came out of like the 1860s and 70s is just really awesome because you had like the Beetle dime novels that covered every sort of going westward type story.
Yeah.
It's really fantastic stuff. And you had mentioned something out in there, Dave, about your desire to get people who would be greats in a different era, out there and seen. And that's sort of been my goal as of late, talking to people that work with writing or work in trying to get their own novels published, is because the mainstream publishing industry is beyond broken. Whether it was that Joyce Carol Oates, tweeting out the other
Oh,
day
God.
that just like white male manuscripts are just automatically thrown out the window, or the fact that they have these antitrust lawsuits going on right now with like Penguin and Random House Publishing, that like the traditional book that they get out there for fiction gets less than like 10,000 read worldwide or even purchased and read by real people. And so I look at what the environment is right now, and I see you guys, I see Matt Pegas and Dan Baltic interviewing writers. And I mean, Dan's about to come out with his debut book. I interviewed our friend T.R. Hudson a while back. And I just keep reading the stuff that this sphere, a mix of, traditionalist people, Nietzschean, anyone that's got this idea that wants to be against this sort of very fake and gay world is putting the best stuff out there, normally by themselves or with what you guys are doing. And I want people to have this question about culture or what does right wing art look like. Like, it isn't just explicitly political. It's like you said, guys just telling cool fucking stories.
Yeah.
And I think that you guys are doing a great job of that, and the other people I've talked to as well. And so any time that I get a chance to talk to these writers, I want them to come on and tell their story. And I'm glad that you've done it so in the way that you have, because passion and enthusiasm is necessary for this sort of stuff. And you're one of the top guys for it.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's like it has grown into like a movement. Like you mentioned, there's Kursova, and there's another one out there called Story Hack, and then there's DMR Books, who do like, if you like the old school Conan Ace paperbacks, that's like pretty much what they do. And then you have us, Bizarchives. You have Aegeon from Brendan Hurd. That does he's part of art, or he started Arius Press. You have Savage Frontiers, which is from Sam Carnes and Paul Wagner. You got Toadstool Magazine, which is actually created by a Bizarchives writer. That's from A. Cuthbertson. We have like a whole catalog of guys, and there's just more cropping up. Like, this is like a legitimate art movement that's happened, a legitimate literary movement that's happening that's born from our spheres, and it's It's just really exciting to be a part of. But what you're talking about there with what I call fempub, I call them fempub because they are yeah, they are a toxic matriarchy, top to bottom. If you go to one of their conventions or events or whatever, you see these like dumpy harpies in stinky sweatpants and box frame glasses, and they're just these sour face, just terrible, just awful, childless cat ladies, right? Just the worst creatures imaginable. Run this thing from top to bottom. They facilitate it. They are the managerial gatekeeping cast of fiction as a whole that ensures that white men, right, don't get too uppity. That's what they're literally what they're about. And we're here to just blow that to pieces and to wage jihad against it. We hate it. But I did a show. Speaking of Brendan Hurd, I went on his show, the Arias Presser Cast, and brought up all of the statistics and all of the sales and all of the numbers showing how they're doing. And they're not doing too good. They're getting slapped around. Indies collectively now, not like us by name, but indies as a collective force, the self-publishers and the micro pubs like us out there collectively are like really dealing some pretty damaging blows to fempub, because what fempub has started to do is they publish what I call soy-fi. It's just this like paused social justice, vaguely camouflaged social justice garbage. We all know what it looks like. They get these BIPOC pet token authors. They lift them up, and doesn't matter how good or how bad they are, they bring them to their award ceremony circle jerks and give them fake awards for things that they don't do. Like N.K. Jemisin, who's just absolutely atrocious, has won like 4 Hugo Awards in a row. They regard her as the greatest fantasy science fiction writer of all time, like better than Frank Herbert and Tolkien and everybody. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's literally a clown show. But if you look at their sales, they are really kept afloat by the perennial bestsellers, right? They are kept afloat by the Tolkiens, by the Howards, by the Stephen Kings, by the 1984s, by the Fahrenheit 451. By they're kept afloat by the perennial bestsellers in their genres that most of them aren't even alive anymore. And then everybody else sells abysmally, and like the bottom 60% or something, or the bottom 80%, I think it was, sells like less than 1,000 books a year. And if you go the bottom 50% sells something to the tune of like 200 books a year. And it's like, that is just like atrocious. Like, you go look on the list, you got like, you're seeing like name after name after name of guys that barely break double digits book sales on their roster. They have an entire stable of authors that have these books that collect dust. Nobody buys them because they suck. And we're here to just blow that to pieces and give people what they want, which is imaginative, entertaining fiction from people that really care about the art form and not, making paused garbage.
Yeah, and I mean, that's something that I've seen as of late I want to say it starts really around like 2010 or so. You get this rise of this like, formulaic, easy to just ship off to some kind of publisher, this rise of the young adult novel. Everyone was trying to rip off the Harry Potter craze or sort of the Twilight movie stuff, and they just sort of realized that it was really easy to sell garbage to kids. Not to mention, of course, when you want to go towards getting stuff paused, you always go younger and younger. But I mean, that's what it is nowadays. You walk into any mainstream bookstore, and I hope that I mean, if you do, right, sometimes it's nice, but you walk into, say, a Barnes and Noble here in the States or a Books A Million or whatever, it's just immediately focusing on merchandise. It's focusing on collectible stuff. The thing that you would find with every bug man on earth.
Yeah, Funko Pops.
Yeah, all of it. And, with the worst kind of people running behind the counter, because it's not like you're there to pick up the classics. You're not there to pick up what you're looking for. You're there to buy junk and to buy garbage. And that's what they're trying to sell for it, is all that young adult urban fantasy stuff. and it's just a mess. And so like the good stuff is either relegated to, like we had said, like the classics, that pulp style of writing that is now put in all those nice leather bound collections. But it's hard to find good new stuff these days, and that this has been the emerging reaction from that publishing community that we've seen for like the last like almost 15 years now. Is just, well, here's this community of writers that have gotten together, good people, whether it's you or the guys at Cervosa or everywhere else. Like, I mean, everyone's got something going on to make sure that the classics live on. And what's better is that we grow and we make new stuff. And I just think that that's where we're at, is that we got to move on from this young adult play garbage and move it in the right direction. And I think that the fact that you're going back to Howard, you're going back to guys like Walter B. Gibson, that we're in a good place if with people like you guys leading the way.
Yeah, somebody in the chat said there's not much new stuff in the vein of those old action pulps. No new Conans. Can anybody think of one? I can think of 10. You could go type in DMR books, and it's literally an entire like catalog of Conans. Like there is, if you want sword and sorcery action, like muscular badassery, that is like, you come into the underground. Look, this is just how art is. Like the best art is always in the underground. What would you rather listen to? Some badass underground metal or just whatever they're playing on the radio, right? The underground stuff is always better. So it's just the way that it is. So if you're looking like if your standard is, oh well, there's no new stuff coming out of the fem pub. Well, there's no new good stuff coming out of Hollyweird either. There's no new good stuff coming out of Netflix. There's no new good stuff coming out of anything from the elites because they're not very talented. Right? They're not very smart. They're not very talented. They're not really good at this. So, it's just the way that it is. If you want to find it, trust me, you will find it.
Well, and that kind of brings me to the next question that I had for you, was just that how do you find these guys? Because you've got quite a few writers and articles written by your authors, yourself included, on your guys' Substack, as well as with links on your main website. Do you guys just start making calls to get these writers? I mean, or how did the campaign go for just word of mouth, or did these guys just naturally find you and start sending in their best work?
Yeah. Well, they have you ever read Call of Cthulhu?
Yeah.
They say that the Call of Cthulhu doesn't, it reaches out to the sensitive few, and they come and find the Cult of Cthulhu. And that's kind of how we are. Like, it's in the beginning, yeah, I reached out to a couple people and stuff like that. But now it's like people are coming to, and it's not just us at the Bizarchives, but it's like this like pulsing core of energy between all of these different publications that are coming out and everything like that. And there's just guys are just coming in. It's just amassing on its own. So I'm like, honestly, there's so much content and so many submissions and so many stories and so much new stuff coming at me. I'm like on my heels the whole time trying to keep up with all of it. Right. I'm like married to this thing now. I work so much, hours and hours a day. So it's like, it's just amassing and creating. It's an amalgamate that is growing on its own.
Well, let's bring that into it then. So with these guys that have come into it, and you've got this thing that, what you've, like you just said, it has become something of its own. So tell us a bit, because you're on issue 3 is coming out. What, it's already out now, and you guys are working on issue 4.
Issue 4 should be out this month.
Oh, fantastic! Even better. I picked a good time to have you come on. So it's like an anthology for those that haven't read it or picked up a copy before. We've got all kinds of works inside, right?
Yeah. Well, so the way the Bizarchives work is it is a serial, but you don't need to start with one, right? You could start with Bizarchives issue 500 if we make it to it, right? And every story is self-contained. You don't need to. You can just pick it up, read it, pick stories at random, pick genres at random, and just have fun with it. There's no. I mean, if you want to start with one and read some of the stories, and you want to see how authors grow, because a lot of our authors, started out what you could call amateur, right? They've never been published before, and they're just like kind of take a stab at it, and turns out that they're pretty good. And over time they grow and they get better, just like with anything. And we as a publication have gotten better. Our covers designs have gotten better. We're learning on the fly, and we're just doing our best to try to make the best stuff possible. So That's just kind of the vibe of it. So what was your question again? I forget.
Oh, I was just going to ask if someone were to buy, either issue 1, 2, or 3, what would it look like for them once they, open the cover up?
Oh yeah, so you could just read whatever. So the way that we do Bizarchives is, like I said, we have all these different genres in there, right? So if you're a sci-fi guy, we got sci-fi in there. If you're a horror guy, we got horror. If you like adventure or fantasy or sword and sorcery, we got that in there. So you could just start wherever. You can literally just crack the Bizarchives, start on any story. They're all self-contained. You don't have to start with one and then go through all of them. You can pick up the books in any order and read them however you want. So yeah, that's what you expect opening up the Bizarchives.
Well, are there any particular authors that you want to highlight or talk about? Anyone or any stories that you've read recently that have come out of your guys' sphere that you really want to talk about or enjoy?
So we just released a novella, the second solo novella from A. Cuthbertson, who appears in Bizarchives 1 with a really cool cosmic horror tale called Tanner's Gold. And then he's also the author of the Count Corlor series, which is a really cool kind of dark fantasy series about sort of an offbeat good guy necromancer as he tries to perfect his arts of magic and raise the dead and like all. It's really, there's a little bit of dark satire in there, there's adventure and weird monsters, and it's really really good stuff. But his first novella with us was a twofer. It was called a cosmic horror double feature, and it features two novellas. One is called Dredge, and the other one's called Prestwick's Project. And this just did very, very well. Guys really, really liked this. So we just came out with his second novella, which is called Spire, which is a dark sci-fi kind of cyberpunk story about the last human city, the last human civilization on a planet that's just called Four. And there's this giant, weird kind of spire, this stone obelisk that sticks up and has power radiating from it, and there's all kinds of weird stuff that happens in the streets and in the underground, and everybody's like doing these futuristic amphetamines, and it's just this amphetamine fueled crazy kind of neurotic action dark sci-fi. It's a really cool story, which is really impressive from Mr. Cuthbertson. He's pretty much written stories in every genre so far and has been very successful. So that book is available. We haven't put it on the website yet, but it's on Amazon for only $8.50 American. So folks over there can go get a copy of that right now.
So alongside, so you said you're the editor in chief, right? You've started this out. I mean, is there anyone that you also directly work with, like you had mentioned? I don't imagine that this is a one man show.
Nope. I have a crew of editors that we work with. Mr. Cypress Walter, who's actually also a writer. He wrote the breastplate of the ancients, and he's got another story in Bizarchives 3. Oh, what's it called? It's like a Weird West cyberpunk story, and there's like a skinwalker in it, and what is that called? The main character is called Kit Barrow. It don't matter, but it's a really good story. And then also we have there's another guy. He's actually runs a YouTube channel here called the Arkham Reporter. So anybody that's a real big fan of Lovecraft content has probably heard of him. He helps us. Mr. Cuthbertson himself helps us. Who else have we got on there? Mr. M.S. Jones. So our authors also like double as editors. Mr. Arbogast helps us with editing and stuff as well. So we have like a really awesome crew of guys that just help with everything.
Oh, I mean, that's fantastic. And I mean, it's always good to have a solid crew, and not to mention ones that, actually do the writing. They're not just specifically editors or anything like that. You got to have people with some experience and know how to get into it. And I'm going through your website, and what I'm going to do here is bring up the website here on screen so people can get a look at it and just talk about some of the stuff that you guys focus on. You've got these great sets of genres. I'm a big fan of biopunk and cosmic horror, just because I love H.P. Lovecraft's work.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I know everyone loves Conan first, but I find the most American character that Robert E. Howard ever wrote was Solomon Kane.
Oh man.
I love him. It's just this idea of this just badass Puritan clearing out the world of evil. it works for me. But for people that are interested, here's the Biz Archives website: Weird Tales of Monsters, Magic and Machines, past and current issues, who they are, how to submit if you want to, and of course they've all got some great stuff along with their Substack. But we'll just go through. For instance, I love Biopunk because it always gives me that feeling of like you even mentioned like the Reanimator,
Hmm.
which everyone should not you should read the story. Do not, I mean, the B movie that's got Jeffrey Combs in it is hilarious, but go read the story first. But yeah, no, you've got a great set of what you've got in terms of genres. Here's what everyone can see.
Yep.
Is there anything that you want to talk about in particularly here? I know that you guys have got your novellas
Hmm.
alongside your serial. So anything in particular that really sticks out that the audience might want to know about?
Oh yeah. So if you are an epic fantasy fan, we got the Chronicles of Heraldria, Sacred Times Part 1 by M.S. Jones. If you are an epic fantasy guy, you like Tolkien, you like Lord Dunsany, you like Robert Jordan or Brandon Sanderson or something like that, Marcus S. Jones, aka M.S. Jones, is fantastic. And this is his first part of his series, which is going to be in 8 parts. Instead of doing like 4 huge books, we broke it into 8 smaller books. So it's a little bit more digestible. So Sacred Times Part 1, if you like fantasy, that is an excellent fantasy series to get started on. This other book is The Molybdus Articulate by Shane Hawkes. He appears in Bizarchives 1 with a really spooky supernatural horror called Baby Teeth. The Molybdus Articulate is probably, if you like Lovecraft, you will like it. If you do not like really purple prose and really vivid, grotesque, monstrous things, you're probably not going to like it. It is we have to put a warning label on that because it is a very disturbing story. So the Molybdus Articulate, if you're a big Lovecraft fan, you're going to love it. It is probably the weirdest story I've ever read. It is so bizarre. There's like weird flashback dreams where like the main character is running through like a black void of human cocoons that are levitating and spinning in place, and there's a just like the most grotesque body horror, cosmic horror kind of stuff you can imagine is in there, and probably worse. So this Articulate is really out there. What else we got? Spire, and also we have what's called the Legacy series. We have Willows, the Willows from Algernon Blackwood, and then also we have Man in the 25th Century, which is by Philip Francis Nolan, which are the first 2 novellas that later became Buck Rogers. So anybody's familiar with the Buck Rogers TV show from the 80s? This is what inspired Buck Rogers. This is the first Buck Rogers, and it is completely different than the one from the 80s. It's like a dystopian sci-fi, gritty action kind of story. Man in the 25th Century is very based.
Yeah, and I mean the fact that you guys have got, one of the most prolific sort of broadcast guys from that old radio style of Algernon and Blackwood is just a delight in my view. But I mean, so the other question that I like to ask everybody who comes on is the question of your writing process. What gets you going to write a story? What does it look like for you to get into it and to put it out there? Um, what's your method? What's your magic?
So I am a crazy obsessive person, right? I am somebody that when I start a project, I get completely obsessed with it, and I have to do it all in 1 or 2 or a few sittings, or it will get abandoned, and then I'll come back to it like years later. You know what I mean? So it's like not years, but months later, right? That's just kind of how I am. I'm short bursts of very high intensity. So when I cook up a story, it really depends what kind of story. I have a few different genres that I like to write in. A lot of folks that are familiar with my writing are going to know me from my Lucius Lex series. I have a sword and sorcery hero who's sort of like grimdark Conan. He's kind of like a mix between Conan and Solomon Kane. His name's Lucius Lex, and he is sort of like 16th century Judge Dredd. And he faces off with these like really grotesque and horrible monstrosities and supernatural, sometimes cosmic entities, and a lot of weird stuff that he goes through. And he's kind of a, you know, I don't actually don't like the dichotomy of anti-hero, but for sake of parlance, he would sort of be an anti-hero. So when I cook up a Lucius Lex story, I generally start with the monster, right? I start with the antagonist. What kind of horrible, bizarre creature or entity can I cook up in my mind, and how would Lucius Lex defeat it? And that is kind of where I start. And then I just go from there. If I do something else, like for example, like I also write in sci-fi. I have my second sci-fi story is going to be coming out in Bizarchives 4, which is called She Has Arrived. It is in the same world as a story I wrote in Bizarchives 1 called They Never Woke Up. People that read Bizarchives 1 will probably be familiar with that one. That is, it is a sci-fi world where the Earth is irradiated, and there's like one last city. It's like this turbo metropolis. Think of like I don't know, like it is, and they live under domes. They live in these gigantic domes, and like millions and billions of people live in these super crowded cities. And there's a lot more to it than that. But I write stories in this world, in this setting. So when I write a sci-fi story, depends what kind of sci-fi story. When I write a sci-fi story, I kind of start with how is human nature? How do we deal with our human nature in a far future where we are completely removed from nature, right? In a world where we don't even remember what cars are. We're that far ahead. We don't remember uh, what like pencils are. We don't remember like the modern age. We're that far ahead that where we are today is completely forgotten. How do humans then still deal with their nature? Because I very much believe that human nature is an objective thing that is in line with nature itself, and you can never get rid of it. And the more that man tries to alter it with technological means, the more troubles that he comes into, and the more horrors that he creates. So I like when I write a sci-fi story, I'm like something that starts with, like, for example, when you guys read She Has Arrived, this is a question of fertility. This is a question of the very basic fundamental teleological purpose of any living organism, which is to replicate itself, right? To have children, to sire children. And in a world where there's problems with fertility because of uh, genetic treatments or whatever, because of gene screening or gene editing, if gene editing has gotten so bad that infertility has arisen from it, how do people react? What happens to the mental state, the mental health of people that can't fulfill their purpose because they've created barriers in front of it? So I create when so to me, science fiction to me is an expression of Luddism. I very much do not like what I call progressive sci-fi, which is Star Trek. You know, I like some Star Trek, watching it or whatever, but it's not serious sci-fi to me. Science fiction to me is a mythopoetic style of storytelling that we've invented in modernity that does not entail or describe our origins or our mythos or where we come from or our ancient history. It has to deal with where we're going, because that is on the opposite end of the spectrum of eschatology, right? Is your doom, your fate, your judgment, your apocalypse, et cetera, et cetera. So, in my opinion, science fiction is the mythopoetics that we describe going forward, because us as modern people are very much concerned. We have a nervousness about where technology is taking us. So, in my mind, stuff like Star Trek and Star Wars and all of the big gay sci-fi, the stuff that Isaac Asimov writes, where we have created a technological solution for everything, and we now have space liberalism, and everybody gets together and jerks each other off, and there's no more trouble. Technology solve all our problems. I hate this. I think this is a monstrous subversion of what science fiction is supposed to be, which science fiction is supposed to deal with questions of what happens to man if we go too far with technology. It doesn't matter if it's in the year 1920, the year 1980, the year 2020, or the year 3000. That is what science fiction is supposed to be, in my opinion. Oh yeah, I see my boy Grimdark Half Off is in the chat. Hail to Grimdark.
Well, earlier you had mentioned your distaste for the term anti-hero, and I was wondering if you could elaborate on that.
Sure. So, I absolutely despise the Mary Sue, or some people call it the Gary Stew. The Mary Sue, I think, is a failure of storytelling. I think it is a complete subversion and misunderstanding of the true heroic archetype designed as modernist apologetics. Right. I was actually spurging about this on Twitter earlier about how I hate Batman because he never kills the Joker. If Batman was really a good guy and he was really a hero, he would take a gun and ventilate the Joker's skull, because every time that he lets the Joker go, because it's his philosophy and his oath and his morals or whatever the hell, the Joker goes off and murders mass amounts of people and commits mayhem, right? A true hero, a man that is actually has goodness in his heart and works on the side of justice, would put a hole uh in the Joker's skull and end him. Good guys kill bad guys without mercy because they understand by their nature they are ontologically evil. Villains that they like, oh, we're gonna send them to jail, or we're gonna do it. This is just fake and gay liberal humanist presuppositions that like rehabilitation baloney and apologetics on behalf of modern prison and judicial systems and stuff like that, instead of like this, because the entire premise, the basis for all of those systems is that human nature is not set. It is not objective. It is, to them, it is nature over nurture, as you can see with like modern education. If you go read books for like early learning, a lot of it is this kooky quack science by Dr. Leslie Hart, who says that if you don't go to school, your actual brain will shrink. Like, they teach that to teachers still to this day. It's absolutely ridiculous. So going back to what this kind of stuff is the Mary Sue is a failure of storytelling, because it is a subversion of the heroic archetype for a few reasons. Number one, they never finish off. They never take care of the villains once and for all. They let them go, or they have no mercy upon them. And I'm not saying that mercy and stuff like that is a bad thing, or being humane is a bad thing. But if somebody is so just maniacally evil, if you have the chance to off them, you will, right? Anybody that's a good guy knows that. If I don't kill this guy, he's going to kill a lot more innocent people, and we can't have that. Another thing is the heroic archetype is somebody that is born of noble blood, somebody that has noble upbringing, somebody that has usually royalty or regality about his lineage, is part of an important lineage of some kind. These modern heroes are a lot of times they're mass, they're the underdogs, blah, blah, blah. And it is this complete inversion where like this like liberation philosophy, where people that are kings and from royal families and of proper bloodlines are all bad and evil, and the good guys are always the underdogs from some nobody, whatever. So that's another subversion of the heroic archetype. And another one is this idea that the Mary Sue is this goody two shoes that never does anything wrong, never does anything cruel, never does anything. And this is completely just flies in the face of the heroes of antiquity. Whether you're looking at like the ones that I mentioned, Beowulf, Odysseus. Like, look at these guys. These guys are kind of like regarded as, these guys are the fathers of all heroes and heroic storytelling, right? sometimes they're lustful, sometimes they're cruel, sometimes they're brash, sometimes they are how a man would operate if a man is literally of superior birth, right? Odysseus and Beowulf behave in the way that they do because they are effectively sort of, and I don't want to get into the splitting hairs about this, but you could attribute them to being like the Nietzschean overman, right? They're the Nietzschean Ubermensch, that they are so powerful and so superior that they operate from a different level of morality. So if they want to bed women, they will. If they want to sail across the sea for gold, they will. If they want to go kick ass in this war, they will. And they themselves are the forces of good because they themselves are born of divine or special or supernatural lineage. And this is the opposite of what modern superheroes are. Is modern superheroes have this constructed abstraction of righteous and goodness and all. And I'm not saying that righteousness and goodness are bad, but when you are creating the heroic archetype, the hero is a force of nature in and of himself. And when you get away from that, you are not creating a hero. You are creating a Mary Sue that never does anything wrong. Nothing bad ever happens to them. They don't have obstacles. They don't have tragedies. They don't have problems, because with the kind of overman and the very, very human, the very human elements of the true heroic archetype also comes the greater struggles than average people have, right? Hercules and his trials, Beowulf and the return of the dragon and his curse, the king's curse, right? You can look at every single true hero of antiquity. That is the heroic archetype, and they all have troubles too. And none of these guys ever have troubles. And if they do, it's just like they brush it aside and they always overcome it, and it's never a problem, right?
Well,
So
yeah, and that's my gripe with what you get out of like modern science fiction, Trek especially, is that Roddenberry gets this like utopian world, and then the writers' room is just like, Gene, we can't write anything out of this because there's no drama, there's no conflict because you've solved it all in this
yeah,
made up sort of utopia. To a point where after he had passed away, like the writers finally had a chance to create a world that had some conflict. This is why, like, out of all of Trek, Deep Space Nine, I think, is the best because you have a war, you have character and morality actually being questioned. Like, it's not just this nitty gritty sort of like, oh, well, we live in this perfect fantasy deal. And I mean, like, the heroes of old and antiquity do illustrate, like you had said, they are sort of the founding blueprint for everything else. And I think this is where you do get Joseph Campbell's the hero with 1,000 faces, where you look at through all these stories in antiquity, and they do have something in common about being these men that descend from noble lineage, and no matter, even if they don't know it, they rise above and they become what that is. Whereas nowadays it's not like that. They've taken what made Joseph Campbell's work so what it is, which is based off of antiquity and the heroes of almost every culture on Earth, and instead they've tried to turn it into this paint by numbers formula as to, well,
exactly.
here we have to have the mandated low point, even though you've already told the audience like 20 minutes in that they're already good and that they're perfect and that they're overcoming it. I mean, this is what's turned, I think, what made Marvel maybe interesting in the 1940s into something that uh, everyone has grown tired of today, right? It's old fashioned stuff that needs to be brought back into the forefront, because all that we've got now is, basically we're just living with like the simulacra of what once was good storytelling.
Exactly. And that is why in 50 years from now, superheroes are going to be like Superman is going to be dusty and forgotten and a relic of its time, and Conan is still going to be based because Conan is immortal. Because it doesn't matter if you take a man from 1930 or a man from 3930. He's gonna read Conan and he's gonna be like, this guy is powerful. He's of base, like, awesome bloodline. He's from an ancient bloodline. He's smarter and stronger and faster than anybody. And he's gonna read this. He's gonna think, if I was stronger and smarter and faster than everybody, and like if I was Conan, hell yeah, I would be bedding some hoes. Hell yeah, I would be wearing jeweled crowns. Hell yeah, I would just sail across the ocean looking for high adventure. Hell yeah. Because that's just like the very just basic like fundamental masculine like expression, right? And especially in modernity where we're caged up and we live these wage slave lives, and we just like everything is nanny state. And this is a whole other topic, but technological society has rendered true masculinity, the function of masculinity, obsolete. We now desire these kind of imaginative worlds that we can go out and be our true selves, right? Where we could go out and we can fight in wars and kill bad guys and slay dragons and blood and guts and bitches and gold and adventure and, all this kind of shit. Because that stuff's based. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying, we should go out and, or we should just like sit and be miserable and we should go out and have our own adventures. But you guys know what I'm saying here, right? There's a place to be inspired by this storytelling and this style of storytelling. This traditional primordial heroic archetype has immortality. It was based 5,000 years ago, and it'll be based in 20,000 years from now. As long as men walk the earth, this type of heroic storytelling will forever be based.
Couldn't agree with you there more. And I think that brings us to the point that I think we should all kind of hammer home here is the fact that so much of fiction's always going to give you a place for escapism. And I think that the big point that Dave and I definitely do agree with on here is just that the escapism that they offer you today is an escapism where you don't even get to exist as a person. Especially if you kind of live in these sort of like dissident or political spheres. What kind of fiction are they really going to offer you where you get to exist, you get to be free, you get to do the things that you want to do, and it's not out there? I mean, every piece of fiction or every piece of media that I see on here time and time again, it offers this this fake world that even though it's fiction, it never is anything that wants to have you actually exist in it. It's overly political. It has a message that says that you can't exist. It's very anti-human, that you don't want to conquer or explore or want to do anything about the world or the worlds out there. And you're left alone to be exactly in a place where you don't get to do anything at all. And this is why I love the pulps. This is why I love the fantasy. This is why I love the shadow. It's because the good guy knows what needs to be done versus these conjured up moral quandaries where they already know how it's going to go in the end. And it's just that you're bludgeoned nowadays with this disgusting world that's just not a place for even people like you and I to even exist in. And I think that that's the great thing that I've seen out of this writing scene. And that's one of the reasons why I always go back to Robert E. Howard. I go back to, The Shadow. Because, I mean, let's face it, The Shadow has always been better than Batman. Anyone that wants to disagree can go take the nearest exit, go ahead and leave. But that's just the case. And that's how I feel. And the fact that stuff is out here and it's creative. And what's best about it is that this is an organic reaction. These are guys, and like you had said, you just took out that last $200 and you wanted to go for it. And I mean, you've created something that's got a pretty well established fan base. And, people want to know more about it because people actually want this stuff.
Yeah, and it's shout out. I saw DT in the chat says he just read They Never Woke Up last night and he loved the story. Thank you so much, Mr. DT, for reading my story and buying our books. I appreciate all you guys that buy the books. It helps us so much. But you mentioned the Shadow is so cool. What a great character. And when it comes to fantasy is has just been so perverted now, right? Fantasy, they literally create this setting over and over and over again. It's not like for example, if you go back and you read Tolkien or you read Howard or you read Jack Vance or you read Lord Dunsany or you Clark Ashton Smith or any of these like really great fantasy writers from back then, they send you in this like far off imaginative world that is also somewhat believable. It makes sense. It might not, obviously it's not real. It is a fantasy, right? But it makes sense. It's coherent and it's a good story. Nowadays in fantasy, they recreate what me and my friends like to call Seattle with elves every single time. They literally just project liberalism on this world with elves and dragonborn and orcs and everything, and everybody's all living hunky-dory together in a city, and there's no racism or bigotry in this world and that they create, and it's just boring, right? And fantasy is just like, that's not what fantasy is about. So they just completely missed the mark with sci-fi with fantasy, and this is why their stuff fails, because they don't get it, right? It's just, I don't know. It's just the modern stuff just really stinks. And I'm not saying that there's not uh, uh, writers out there that are good. There certainly are writers out there that are good, that are probably in the mainstream or whatever. But the guys in the underground really, really get it, because they're not coming into this like, hey, I'm going to create propaganda. Because this is what they do. This is the goal of the liberal humanism cult, is they must proselytize. Everything they touch must reflect their worldview, because if it doesn't reflect their worldview, and there's a different type of worldview exists, or a different type of uh, social structure exists, then therefore theirs is wrong, and then is not universally true, and it falls apart, and they can't have that. So they must retcon history, they must retcon art, they must retcon everything. And they do this with writing this stuff, and then giving themselves awards, and botting followers to their Twitter accounts, and like all of this kind of stuff. But if you go back and you read the old school stuff, and you read the underground stuff, this fantasy still gets it, right? It has the tension of different factions that are going to war. It has depending on what kind of fantasy is, right? There's epic fantasy, there's dark fantasy, there's sword and sorcery, and these all kind of have their a little bit different vibes. But if you go back and you read it, it's not like you're reading, oh well, this is just like today with elves and orcs and everything and blah 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 and magic. It's, you get transported to another world where physics is different, where the laws of nature are different, where cultures are believably kind of fantastical, right? They're like true fantasists, and it's poetic, and it kind of, I don't know, it's just like the way that they do it now with the Seattle with elves is just like the superheroes, just like with sci-fi, just like with all this kind of stuff. FemPub just creates garbage.
Yeah, I mean, I love that term Seattle with elves. I'm definitely I'm stealing that one from you, Mark. Dave, that was pretty good. I mean, that's really one of the bigger complaints that I've noticed over just the decrease in quality of fiction of all this, is just that even when people want to try and depict actual things in life that do happen in fantasy in the real world, I mean, it's never ever put on because they have to bend to the sort of the political pressures of the day. I mean, people want to escape, and I mean, video games I think are a really good example of this alongside, because people want to escape into that fantasy world. That's why, the Elder Scrolls series, even the most recent version that's just 10 years old now, is still people still play it. But even when they try and depict things like, oh, like these, very Nordic human beings are like racist against elves or whatever, it's just like it's there for 2 seconds and then it's gone. It never depicts what the actual world would look like, or the real consequences of the actions or the beliefs of these people. And it's never more than any of that. You see that today, whether it's in movies, or especially now. And you mentioned that proselytizing, but they have to proselytize. And I think that that's one of the biggest reasons why they have to continuously go back and corrupt old intellectual property, because none of the garbage and production quality that you see out of whatever Amazon has done with whatever rights they got to Tolkien's work, like none of that would ever exist if it weren't for the fact it was budding off of The Lord of the Rings and J.R.R. Tolkien. None of that would be happening right now, because everything I've noticed, whether it's, Tolkien's work, whether it's, James Bond, or even whatever has become of Star Wars nowadays, it all has to be from pre-existing greats that has to be twisted and ruined. And I think the last time that I saw something that was like genuinely interesting and genuinely like good out of, um, you know, Hollywood, I think it was like Darkman back in 1990 with Sam Raimi. Like I have to go back over 30 years to find something good and original that had an interesting sort of superhero, supervillain like character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's another thing that they just like stink. First of all, these people, they, like we mentioned earlier, their goal is not to create art. Their goal is to retcon, is to uh, change things in order to fit inside of so they, all they do is create propaganda. They don't have the talent, they don't have the soul stuff to create something that has uniqueness, that has immortality. They can't create art. They can only create propaganda. And this is why we're seeing, all of this kind of stuff fail, because now your average Joe Schmo is not going to watch the Rings of Power and like have the conversations that we have about it, getting into kind of the nature of fantasy and where they went wrong. And he's just going to intuitively know that this sucks, right? This blows otherwise. And you can ask him, like, well, why didn't you like it? Because it blows. He doesn't know, but he knows intuitively that this is stinky stuff, right? Because storytelling is we can get into the nature of storytelling, but with villains, they do not create believable villains, because in their worldview, the villain, like in their worldview, evil is something that exists in the past, and evil does not really exist anymore. And they don't actually believe in evil, right? They don't actually believe in evil. To them, that which is evil is a like infantile, spoiled, rich white man. That is like it is just like there's no endless to his cruelty. He's just completely just there's no rhyme or reason to his actions. And this is their villain. And this is not a good villain, right? If you go and you look at, like, for example, the last Star Wars movies that came out, what was the guy with the big schnoz? I forget his name. He was like the new Darth Vader or whatever. That guy stunk, right? He just had hissy fits and tantrums, and there was no really rhyme or reason to do anything that he did. And he did not wield. So in order for a good guy, when you have this type of storytelling, right? When you have the good versus evil dynamic in storytelling, the good guy, the protagonist, what gives him meaning is the power wielded by the antagonist. Now go all the way back to the first Star Wars, which in my opinion is the only good Star Wars. Darth Vader is a spooky, scary, powerful guy, and he sort of makes sense, right? You could sort of see where he's coming from, right? The Jedi have created this kind of like wishy-washy, goofy kind of new age democracy in the universe, and it has led to disunity, and now there's crime and all this kind of stuff, and he's here to unify it under an empire. And if you look at him as a character, he is when you hear the music and you hear his voice and like all this kind of stuff, he gives you he commands respect because he holds actual power. He is a dominant force. So he is a good villain. Fast forward to the new Star Wars, it's like that guy stinks, right? You got that rando black guy character that was like he was just like there to have a black guy. You have this girl that like just picked up a lightsaber yesterday, and they like kick his ass, right? If Darth Vader was there, he would have just like force hucked them off of a cliff and it would have been over. That's how powerful he was. They can't create villains that command respect. And because they can't create villains that command respect, they can't have heroes that are worthwhile, right? Half of the fun of a story where you have good versus evil is how badass the evil is.
Well, you had mentioned storytelling. I kind of wanted to dive into that as we sort of get past the hour mark here. Was just what makes good storytelling to you? Because I mean, like we have all seen good versus evil, and I think, like you had mentioned, they don't have evil that is relatable or understandable, or can understand the sake of the world. I mean, even the original 1977 Star Wars kind of makes it very clear from the opening text who you're supposed to root for, but you kind of look at it in the whole context and you're like, well, you can understand where the Empire's coming from. There's this order, there's this exploration and defense against the unknown. And yet nowadays, it's very explicit, we're going to strap you down, keep your eyes, like a Clockwork Orange sort of deal. And like, you're going to be forced to watch the good guys win with no risk to their lives whatsoever.
Exactly.
They've neutered and castrated evil. They can't make it understandable to what it's relatable to. And all that it is nowadays is their projection of what they think evil is meant to be. And like, not too long ago, I was in a situation where I watched this awful Netflix film called like Gray Man with the guy who played Captain America and what's his name? Not it doesn't matter. But I mean, like the villain is meant to be this like whiny character. He's constantly ordering others around. He's not actually in the fight himself, and when he does, he gets his ass beat really quickly. And so it's just like, oh wow, like it's not an evil that I could care or relate to. It's your projections that are something that comes out of like an HR manager's just like wet dream, and it's nothing more than that. And so like good storytelling in that regard to evil is just going to tell me that I can understand where the character's coming from, that they might have a motivation or a belief system that I might actually agree with. And nowadays, you just don't get that. And I mean, I think that your point there about Darth Vader is just perfect because you know who he is. And the other thing too is that like in that movie, the original one, he's only in it for like 5 minutes of screen time. It's a lot like Jaws. Like what the evil is, what the scary thing is, but you don't. It's a matter of showing and not telling. And if you can command that much fear in like 5 or 7 minutes, then that you've done it right. But nowadays, you don't get that.
Exactly. That is well, they can't create evil because they don't believe in evil. They don't know what evil looks like, right? They don't understand evil because, like I said, they don't believe it. It doesn't exist in their world. Evil is something that to them existed in the past, right? That is something that old racist, oppressive, patriarchy and blah, 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 that to them was evil. But now that they're working to abolish these systems, evil is waning, right? So to them, they don't have this belief. This is why religious people write the best stories a lot of the times, right? Religious people write great stories about evil because they actually have a real fear of evil. They actually believe it. They understand what it's about, right? And you could even like Lovecraft. H.P. Lovecraft was a kind of like self-doubting, self-hating materialist. He himself wrote about not necessarily evil, but he wrote about an antagonist force in the universe because he actually feared that, right? He actually had this kind of like neurotic kind of obsession, this fear of like being meaningless and being hopeless and like all of this because he lived that. He actually had depression. He was actually a shut-in. He actually had these feelings and this understanding of these the like modernist creatures that are making entertainment now. They can't create a villain because they don't know what evil means and they don't believe in it. They don't actually believe in it. It's just a word to describe something bad that they don't like, right? There's no supernatural or otherworldly evil in their worldview. Whereas like guys like us who are religious people know that there are forces out there that are supernaturally evil.
Yeah, I think that your point about religious people or anyone with any kind of religious belief have written some of the greatest epics and pieces of fiction that have ever come in existence. I mean, you wouldn't get the, epics of the Iliad and the Odyssey without the ancient Greeks and their religion. You wouldn't get the Aeneid if not for the Romans. I mean, even the more contemporary Christian writers of Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. I mean, that Hideous Strength is one of my favorite science fiction works ever written. I mean, you have to have some kind of genuine belief to do so. And when you remove all belief, you're left with this sort of materialist fear of really, if anything, just like life not going on the way that you want it to, or what keeps you away from your fantasy. And I think that we saw a lot about that, to maybe bring a dash of politics into it. I think you saw a lot of that when sort of like when the coup happened, where a lot of people wanted to do anything humanly possible that they could to prevent themselves from dying because they had no other kind of belief system, regardless of whatever that belief system may be. I mean, from Homer, Dante, Milton, as Im points out in the chat, all these great men had a fundamental belief in any kind of religious system. And that's what drove them to write great works. And I mean, the same doesn't apply just to the West. I mean, there are some really great works of epics and tales and such that in India as well. I mean, you do have to have some kind of belief, I think, to really have a good striking heart at evil and what's good.
Yeah. There's a lot of great like East Asian horror movies, Korean and Japanese, and a lot of this is inspired by their belief in kind of their animistic beliefs, so like Shinto and stuff like that, where they believe in these like evil, malevolent commies that will like screw their lives up and possess people and do evil stuff, right? So this kind of like belief in a I guess you could say, I guess a magical world or a mystified world or a world beyond a metaphysical world. To have this kind of ingrained, innate belief in that does wonders for telling stories. And you wanted to talk about the nature of storytelling. The nature of storytelling is the oldest art that there has ever been, right? You go back to the oldest times of man, right? You go back to the Stone Age or Neolithic times or whatever. What were people doing? What was the first art? Well, a lot of people say, like, cave paintings or something like that. What preceded that? And we know that there's something that preceded that because it lived on beyond that. That is storytelling, oral storytelling. And the first type of oral storytelling was what we could understand, what we would probably now call folk horror, right? Or fantasy, right? They were telling stories of their heroes, of their ancestors that went out and did great deeds, or slayed great beasts, and they were also telling stories of what lurked in the deep dark bowels of nature, in the mountain valleys and peaks and the dark overgrown forests where no man has ever been. And this is like the most primordial style of storytelling. So telling stories, storytelling, and then it evolved into poetry, is the oldest art form. And the purpose, the function of storytelling is, one, it serves the function of demonstrating and teaching through metaphor, teaching morality, teaching history, teaching story. Because if you go and you look at the ancient poetry, the ballads of Greece, and the Eddas, and the stories of our ancestors that were actually written in poetic meter because they were designed to be sung, right? This was designed to teach us the history of our race, of our people, right? The first ones, how we came to be, how the earth was created. This was also there to demonstrate and create and teach through metaphor morality and ethics and stuff like that, because us in these spheres are very much, we are the type of people that can learn through abstraction. We're the type of people that can learn through like kind of exposition, and we can read these kind of like big brain analytical books and take from that. Regular people don't really have the patience or the capacity to learn that way. They learn the way that they've always learned since the dawn of man, and that is through metaphor, through storytelling. So storytelling is it isn't just like some sort of like pastime. It's not some nerd thing. It is a primordial art form that is part of our DNA and part of our spirit. It's part of who we are spiritually. So it's like, what is the nature of storytelling? Well, the nature of storytelling is a spiritual expression. It is a spiritual expression that that teaches, that entertains, that enthralls, that encaptures, that inspires, that does all of the above. It is magic. Storytelling is magic. When I say magic, a lot of people, modern people, will think of magic. They think of like Dungeons and Dragons, wizards throwing fireballs and stuff. That's not how our ancestors looked at magic. Our ancestors looked at magic as anything that could affect reality through metaphysical means, right? Like the runes or reading and writing was magic. If you think about it, to an ancient person that like had no use for reading and writing, the fact that you could turn thoughts into shapes is a form of magic. So magic is something that's more mundane than kind of what we assume from the influence of video games and movies and stuff, which that stuff's cool and interesting, but storytelling is magic. It is a spiritual expression. It is something that comes from deep in our souls, from our folk consciousness, and it's something that we express onto others. It is a conveyance of power. It is something that teaches. It is something that is designed to force a reaction, to force an emotion, to force something upon somebody in a positive or negative or whatever kind of way. So that is what storytelling is. Storytelling is magic.
Yeah, and storytelling, the oral tradition has gone back as long as humans were as tribal and grouped together around a campfire or something. I mean, even from Aesop's fables to the fact that even you see in religious text that whether it's in Christianity or in other faiths, I mean, people spoke in parable, people spoke in stories and epics because it conveyed the meaning of their truth and whatnot. That's how it operated on, and people would try and read into these things in order to understand and gleam the kind of influence from the divine or whatever divinity that they may have believed in.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the oldest part of what makes humanity is our ability to use our imagination to convey stories, to teach morals. And it's an insane thing that we've watched the quality of our stories disappear. And again, this is why I get this is the real political white pill for everybody listening, and for those who do read the work that so many people put out there, like what Dave does or what other authors self publishes, is that there are people that are genuinely reacting to this stuff, and good storytelling is not dead.
And it will never be dead as long as people like us breathe, as long as we exist, as long as our folk soul is alive and thriving, as long as we are intact and we walk this earth, we will have the capacity to continue the storytelling tradition for as long as we exist until the end of days, right? So it's not some, we look at fantasy and science fiction and stuff like that, and a lot of people, oh, that's nerd stuff. I completely disagree, and I think, yeah, there is a contingency of people that could be considered nerds. Like, I'm not, whatever, but um, if you look at it, it is our chapter in the grand ancestral saga that is the spiritual tradition of storytelling of our people that transcends epochs, it transcends time periods, it transcends technology, it transcends cultures, and it has gone across languages as they evolve and cultures as they evolve, and it is something that transcends time and space. It is something that is part of us and will be until the end of time. So no, it is not lost. Yes, it is meaningful. It is meaningful to us. And that is what guys in the underground and the pulp scene want to create. And can we guarantee that we're going to come out with the next Tolkien or the next Howard? I don't know about that. But we're a bunch of guys that are guys like you guys listening, and we're doing the best that we can. And I like to think that we got a pretty darn talented bunch that writes some pretty cool stories. So if you want to check this stuff out, the Bizarchives, there's going to be some stories in there that you love. Some of them that you don't love so much. Some are stronger than others. Some are going to blow your mind. Some you're just going to like. They're just there for because they're entertaining, awesome stories, and it's just all of the above. Because above all, we just want that raw spiritual expression of storytelling to kind of uh, entertain the reader and take them to an imaginative, weird, fun, meaningful place that is different, that is different than their mundane everyday routine.
The one thing I gotta add though is the quality of the illustrations. I don't know who does them for you, but one of my favorite things that I've loved about pulp, whether it's old copies of amazing stories or just the sort of paperback novels you'd get from science fiction in the 1940s and 50s, was the illustrations. One of my favorite
Mhm.
illustrators is Frank R. Paul, who did a lot of stuff for Amazing Stories magazine and other
Oh
places.
yeah.
That stuff just is part and parcel, that we get these amazing stories, but we also get these like fantastic illustrations. And I'm going to share the screen again so people can see that. Uh, the three that you've got on here, because I mean, just like look at that artwork. Like the middle one is just based as hell, but I mean, all of them are just really good. And I'm always a big fan of good illustration alongside pulp.
Yeah, we have interior illustration in the second, in 2 and 3 as well. So, Bizarchives 2, or this Bizarchives here that you're looking at, is Bizarchives 3, that was drawn by a Finnish guy named Arturi Kivela, who is actually also the concept artist for our video game that's coming out, Legends of Hyperborea. And then the other books, and then the interior art for this was drawn by Brendan Hurd. And then also Bizarchives 2, the cover and the interior is all done by the mighty Donald Kent, and he is just fantastic. It's a little bit different than like your OG pulp art that was around during during the times of Amazing Stories or Weird Tales. It's more comic book stuff. So we went with something a little bit more modern because we felt that people walking around today would be more familiar with this. But our next cover is going to be more in the vein of old school pulp, and we're going to unveil that very, very soon. So yeah, we love working with our artists and getting our artists involved, and art illustration is a huge part of this art form.
Yeah, I mean, Donald Kent's just an absolute Chad. I mean,
Yeah,
I,
he's
I love the work that he does, and him and Nullus get together and do things I also really appreciate. And shout out to Nullus; he's also in the chat right
oh
now.
Nullus
But
is, oh man, shout out, dude. Nullus is my dude. Tremendous, tremendous poet.
oh, absolutely. I love just the art scene here is so vibrant, and I'm quite happy to see it where it is today. People should not be down and out about when people ask, well, what does the right have to offer? What do dissidents have to offer? I mean, just like it does not take a lot of looking to find some really fantastic work here.
Yeah, we got some more covers. You want to bring up our other covers? There's some more cool ones.
Yeah, let me go up and
Past,
see
present
here.
issues, probably.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, there you go. Look at that.
Yep. Donald Kent did the first two there. Arturo Cavella did the third one. Yeah, that second one there, that is the story by M.S. Jones called The Dune Lord's Dreaming. Oh man, is that a good story? That is probably in my top five like fantasy stories of all time. Tremendous. That first one is depicting a introduction piece that I wrote called Welcome. If you want to scroll down.
Sure can.
Yep, the Cosmic Horror double feature right there we were talking about earlier. Yep, the Willows there. That was drawn by Arturo Cavella. But this Man in the 25th Century, that was drawn by Don Kent. That's Buck Rogers right there.
Well, you guys are gonna have nothing more than a treat here to check this out, and along with every other writer I've brought on. So the culture is there, guys. You just have to go out and reach for it. But as we sort of get to the 90-minute mark here, Dave, is there anything else that you want to really let people know about the Biz Archives, or where you think the pulp and fantasy scene is going? I noticed someone else in chat was saying that you guys are like one of 5 other big groups that are putting out pulp and fantasy out there for the community and for really just the whole world to enjoy again. So where do you think pulp and fantasy is going in the future, and what's the future of the Biz Archives?
Well, pulp is back. Pulp is nigh. We are here. It's coming. There's nothing they can do to stop us. They, the foundations of FemPub and their institutions are crumbling. The barbarians are at the gates. We are going to leap over the walls and charge in and take back our beloved traditions, our literary traditions, in the name of our literary heroes, our forebears, and reclaim it by force. And there's nothing they can do to stop us. So we are on the way. As far as that goes, I think the sky's the limit. I'm not even worried about some sort of, being stopped or whatever. Let's fucking go. We're here and we're not going to stop working until we've made it. And even then, we're going to keep going, right? We're going to take FemPub and we are going to strangle them until the life leaves their eyes, and we are going to reclaim our thrones. It is ours. So here we go. Let's go. And then as far as the Bizarchives go, I don't even know, man. I'm having so much fun doing this. We're selling books. We're doing good. We're expanding all the time. People, man, it's just like, I'm so blessed. You know what I mean? I just feel so blessed to be a part of this cool little movement here. I get emails and messages all the time from guys that haven't picked up books in like ages. And they say, Dave, thank you for like making reading cool again. And like, thank you for showing me this stuff. I thought it was all over. And, I get so much positive feedback and stuff like that, that it's just, I don't even know. I'm just beside myself. I'm just so grateful and blessed. And thank you. I see a bunch of my boys and a bunch of positivity in the chat. Love and blessings to all you guys. The Bizarchives and the rest of the pulp cult is going to keep working and keep spreading until we conquer the entirety of the earth and beyond. And that's just what we're here to do. And we're going to keep writing. We're going to keep publishing. We're going to keep bringing out the classics of yesteryear that they try to bury. And it's just, we're going to have fun, and we're going to make a little bit of money doing it at the same time.
Well, Dave, all of the Biz Archives links are down below in the description. I wanted to just say thank you so much for coming on. I think that it's important for people to see where the culture is going and that this stuff is not dead. It did not leave in the 20th century. It is still very much alive in the 21st and will continue to be so. So with that, do you guys have a planned release date for when the next one might be out soon?
So we have 3 books set up for. So we had 4 set up for October, for spooky month, right? We released one of them, Spire by A. Cuthbertson. That's out on Amazon. We got to get that on the website. We had another one called Masters of Horror, which was a compilation of some really, really badass old school writers. But there's some is the public domain status of a couple of the stories is questionable. So we're doing like a legal review of that to make sure we don't get sued. Right. And then we have another novella, debut novella from somebody coming out. I can't release any details about it. And then hopefully, I'm hoping after all of this, after we get all of that done, that we'll be able to hit our deadline and get Bizarchives 4 out on time for Halloween. It's gonna take some time, but we're working towards it.
Well, that's fantastic news. And DT in the chat here just says, discover the Biz Archives after that Conan stream with Semiagog and really enjoyed him. Great achievement. Can't wait to see all the new books.
Thank you, DT. Thank you so much. Shout out Semiagog. Great guy.
Oh, yeah. Semiagog's great. And if you guys aren't subscribed to him, shame on you. You should be. And go watch that Conan stream if you haven't already. But with that, Dave, I just wanted to say thank you again for coming on. All of your links are down below in the description. And I know that it's always good when viewers from other places, whether it's Telegram or Twitter or even your own website, get to see where you've been. And even my audience can get some exposure to you. So I really hope that they've enjoyed this as much as I have talking to you.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I will see you all next time. I probably won't be live. I will have a new video out shortly. So if you haven't checked out Dave Martel's work, whether it's with Culture Dads, with Mike from Imperium Press, or all of the wonderful links down below for the Biz Archives, do check them out. And until then, I will see you all next time. Take care, guys.